what I often see is really top-down sort of leadership when we're faced with these issues. Whereas, I really believe in a bottom-up approach, speaking with students on the ground and asking them, what is it that you want, right? How is it that we can help you and support your experience in moving forward?
The Canadian higher education landscape is experiencing a profound transformation as AI technologies redefine traditional teaching, learning, and administrative processes. I'm speaking with Dr. Andre de Freitas, founder of EdVisingU and a leader in education innovation, about how Canadian universities are navigating this technological revolution while maintaining their distinctive educational values and meeting unique regional challenges. Dr. de Freitas, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Ray. I'm looking forward to it.
It's a pleasure. I've looked at some recent surveys that show Canadian universities are adopting AI at varying rates. It's somewhat similar here in the United States. Some are embracing it fully, while others are maintaining a more cautious approach, not quite sure how to implement it or apply it. What factors do you see driving these different institutional responses to AI integration? What's causing the disparity?
It depends on what angle or context we're speaking about this, just in terms of the time of where we're at. I mean, Canada, we've just sort of completed our elections, this past week, and which is going to have a significant impact in terms of what the direction is going to be in terms of adopting and different governance frameworks, AI frameworks, and what the funding is going to be, quite frankly, to support, the universities and colleges in Canada and where I'm based in Toronto, Ontario. There are some universities and some colleges, out there that have been in the AI game quite some time ago, and having these innovation hubs out there, significantly impacting their influences on how they're influencing the sector. And, especially, places like Durham College in Ontario, also UFT, University of Toronto. We're also at an intersection of where things are stopping because Ontario, at least of where I'm based, we have expired funding models. And we're also with this, what I used to call maybe about 5 or 7 years ago after COVID, I used to speak to my colleagues and say, there's going to be a time that we're going to face all of this type of disruption. And what I called it the Uberization of education. Mm-hmm. Right. And, that's exactly where we're at right now. And with, not just the funding gaps that are impacting how we're going to be moving forward, AI came at the same time. Executive teams and boards and senates are having a very difficult time, managing the expectations and the responses of how to respond to the disruption, and also to think innovatively of like how to do more with less, right? We can only do so much, right? And we also are thinking about the Gen Zs and those questions of like, is that credential even relevant anymore? Am I going to pay $40,000 for a 4-year traditional undergrad degree? And why am I going to enter into university or college other than the social aspect to pay that $40,000 or $50,000 when I can probably get the same learning outcomes from Google from a traditional Bachelor of Business Administration program, as an example, are the type of questions, at least, that I'm hearing from students. And so Ontario, for example, in Canada, we are one of the provinces that has the lowest funding per student that we actually receive support
really?
for compared to our other provinces. Whereas BC, British Columbia, they typically receive over $15,000 per student from the government, whereas in Canada, we're just under $9,000. Universities and colleges, to be fair, were subsidizing those sort of gaps and that disparity through the international student population, which you have saw also those huge headlines and and what has impacted the sector right now. And that's why we're finding ourselves in these huge deficits, right? And so that's where these executive teams and senates and boards are responding to, is like, how do we respond to these deficits? Our deficits are ranging from anywhere from $10 million to $150 million in Ontario.
Wow.
And no one has ever seen this before. And we're seeing hundreds and thousands of jobs be eliminated week by week. And I think, in the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to see more. I know, and I can appreciate, us talking about artificial intelligence and how that's, going to be influencing in the future of education. I think, unfortunately, because of the financial impacts that are hitting our sector right now, there just hasn't really been that opportunity for that, fulsome discussion that we would have loved to see.
Let's jump into that then, because first of all, you mentioned the Uberization of higher education also happening here. We had a great podcast episode a couple of weeks ago on that and sort of the adjunct population. But pulling back to that financial picture you just painted, the Canadian government knows, and the institutions know, that Canadian higher education is a driver of economic development. It is a point of pride. It is a driver of innovation. It would seem to me that there need to be government actions to help support and shape the future of Canadian higher education, particularly given these market challenges. How is the Canadian government responding to these challenges, or is it? Or do you see sort of a debate about what the future should look like?
We have, organizations that's, from Ontario and nationally as well. But, I'll speak more to the Ontario ones where I'm based at, such as Council of Universities and Colleges Ontario, and research firms such as like HECO, which is our Higher Education Council of Quality Assurance, who supports the research to our government about, these type of discussions and where the future of education would be. And we've had some different reports in the past year, at least. One was called the Blue Ribbon Report that actually presented the research to our Ontario government to let them know what path they need to take financially to better support these institutions into moving them forward into the future. I think what's happened in Ontario is that we've only been, and I think in Canada as well, is on the national level, is we've only been carrying forward with Band-Aid solutions. Our funding frameworks have been from the 1960s and, from 1990s. I wasn't even in college yet, but I just trying to remember, that we had the block funding models and, those were like fixed grants that just went to the institutions, whereas it evolved to sort of enrollment-based funding. So, how many students do you have in your entire community? We'll give you that amount of money based on that. And then we moved to, in the 2010s, to the performance-based fundings. And so funding models, sorry. And so these would be things based on like, what are your graduation rates and graduation to sector employment opportunities, et cetera. And institutions would be rewarded, on that way, in that way of funding, sorry, right? And then what we're seeing now, in terms of when we're looking at signing on to new funding agreements, and which I was happy to see only last week, is that our provincial government said, listen, we're going to pause because we're supposed to sign right now because they're expired. And we're actually going to relook at this. We've heard you. We heard all of, we've heard the students. We've heard Council of Universities. We've heard Colleges Ontario. We've heard the sector. And they're going to be looking at, what this policy reassessment will look like. And I've actually written 2 papers on this in the last 6 months. And one is on our strategic mandate agreements that hold us accountable as institutions to how we support students in terms of the student experience, our graduation outcomes, and then also just specifically on what like funding models should be used in at least the next 5 years to support the evolution of our institutions, right? And so, or the growth of our institutions. For example, digital transformation. This brings us back to AI. Right? At least a minimum of 50% of funding that goes to institutions right now need to support them in digital transformation. The rest of the base funding needs to just support us in getting us afloat.
Let's stick with that, because I think getting back to AI, we're seeing AI be applied across various university functions to create efficiencies, frankly, from admissions to content delivery to student support. So from your perspective, what applications are showing the most promising results, specifically in the Canadian education ecosystem?
Well, we need to look at AI can do lots of things, as we know, but we need to really, stop. And I think the first thing that we need to do is, relook at governance structures that limit us from moving forward in a rapid way that we actually need to be doing. And I respect our senates and, I respect our academic colleagues and I respect our boards and our executive teams. But what I often see is really top down sort of leadership when we're faced with these issues, Whereas I really believe in a bottom-up approach. And when you start, when me speaking with students on the ground and asking them, what is it that you want, right? How is it that we can help you and support your experience in moving forward? A lot of students have said, like, well, we're starting to delve into AI, but we have no idea of how to use it. And so where is the Mastering ChatGPT course that should already be embedded in every single course curriculum,
Absolutely.
that is there to support each part of these, courses? And what I'm doing personally to respond to that exact question is I've created over 65 micro credentials right now that have and partnered with one of our leading learning management systems that's actually based out of Toronto, Canada. They're called disco.co. And I'm transferring all of my courses over there to their system. So I can actually teach underrepresented populations and underserved populations of students and learners to ensure that we're not just, allowing that divide of, quite frankly, rich and poor to continue growing. Because what I see is what with AI, that's exactly what it's doing. And so the AI can support our institutions in many ways. And, that's one of the ways is rethinking curriculum, rethinking access, rethinking just the foundation of, how we're providing education to our students itself.
You brought up a really interesting point, and one of the major criticisms I hear in the US, and it's probably internationally, and particularly from faculty, around equity and access. Critics would argue that an over-reliance on AI might undermine certain educational values and frankly, uniquely Canadian educational values. What's your advice to institutions to balance that technological innovation, that strategy, with core cultural commitments?
We're seeing a lot of research out there and critiques on, the bias within AI. And I think as educators and leaders and, academics, it is part of our responsibility to ensure whatever products that we're utilizing is figuring out, what is those LLMs or knowledge bases that they're using to extract information from to support the student journey. If we can ensure that they have those governance frameworks, those ethical frameworks in place that we find alignment to as institutions and educators, then I think that is something that we should be at least, I would say, okay with, just at a basic level. And, there's a second part to that I also think is that we're spending a lot of time, unfortunately, in trying to find out why we shouldn't be using AI in certain ways. But we can't stop it. And I don't see who's going to be able to stop this. Even my own AI learning journey, like every single day I beat up myself because I can't even keep up with how fast this is going in my own learning. And like, how am I going to be able to teach my kids when I've already just built the curriculum that I wanted my two sons to use and it's outdated already because I've been working on it for the last 3 months and there's a better product that has come out to respond to that.
Well, none of us can, right? None of us have the time and energy. I mean, that's not true. I know a few people, some very special people who are always at the leading edge, including the CEO of Element 451, always at the leading edge of AI innovation. But it takes a lot of effort, to your point. And this is a problem across higher ed. What advice would you give? What strategy would you suggest to anyone in higher ed listening that they use to try and wrestle with this? What is your format? How do you just like sit down an hour every day and like, I'm going to learn a new AI tool? Do you have like a process?
So I use Notion or my Google Sheets, and for products that are coming out or advancements in products and that have come out that I'm not able to get to, I put it on my whiteboard that, this is your to-do list. And that list, quite frankly, is pretty long. And so I think people who are starting out their journeys, especially, as our communities, at the executive teams who are faced with these challenges and questions about, how do I integrate AI across not just the academic part of my institution, but the administrative parts of my institution, is really the only way that they're actually going to be able to do that is one, if they have a great AI advisor, or two, is that, they really need to carve out that time. In learning the fundamentals of AI, right? Because we're lifelong learners, right? Like, how can you actually be a student advocate if you're not understanding that part of your job is to be a lifelong learner, right? Education is always evolving. And as they're stating, we're hitting the fourth industrial revolution, as they're saying right out there. And I would say, at least, I'm a Zennial, and I'm quite actually happy that I got to see the internet come up and I got to play on DOS disks, right? And then now, I'm at the age where I'm actually seeing this next part where it's bringing me back to actually, I'm thinking like I'm a kid most of the time, because I want to give you a perfect example of, how committed I am to this. Is that when my son, who plays rep basketball, I go to his practices 3 times a week, and then his games on the weekends, my laptop is with me with my earpods while he's practicing. I'm doing this, right? But the point of the message of what I'm just trying to get through is that everyone needs to start their AI learning journey, and they need to start it now. And they should have actually started it over a year and a half ago. And some people can't, for varying reasons, and it's easier said than done. It goes back to the ethics and of things, of access, and that's the reason why, circling back to the micro credentials, why I'm creating micro credentials, so that they're accessible any time of the day and that they're going to be free, right? And so that people can access these micro credentials for free, so they're going to be able to support their own learning journeys.
It's a lot, and it's a really great way to phrase it. I had a cousin who, in her 90s, told me that one of her biggest regrets was not learning how to use a computer. And she told me this in 2010, 2011, because she saw that she had missed 20 years of emailing relatives and all kinds of access to information. And I think you're right. I think if you let that go now and you don't sort of jump on with the enthusiasm of a teenager using AOL or learning, installing things on floppy disks, you're not going to develop the competencies to do it. So given your perspective, I think this is a great place to kind of finish our conversation. Looking ahead, if you had to use your crystal ball and look at the next 3 to 5 years, how do you anticipate AI reshaping relationships between Canadian universities, industry partners, government stakeholders in ways that might be unique?
It's a great question, and it's part of the research that I'm putting out there. I think the future is private-public partnership. I really think that the only way, at least in Canada and the US, to be quite frank, that our universities and colleges are going to survive is by partnering with big tech giants such as Microsoft and Google. Like, look at Arizona State University. Like, look at what they're doing and what their success is. It's insane, right? And like, why aren't we all just at least following 10% of what they're doing, right? So I really believe in private-public partnership for the future, really figuring out, how do we get Microsoft or Google or Amazon into the universities, not to shape what the cultures are and not to rejig everything that we've, created over the last 150 years, but how can they better support us? Right now, we need to be able to create a course in such a rapid way that traditionally would take about 2 years before it goes through an approval process until it can actually get launched to a student. We need to actually do that in 2 weeks. Right? Because there's so many different products, there's so many different, entrepreneurs coming up. And the future, what I believe in with AI, is all about entrepreneurship, right? It's about, building out your social brand. How are you building on AI? What are you going to do with AI? What AI skills do you have? It's not about that traditional resume anymore, right? They're just going to be looking at your LinkedIn, what AI skills you have, and looking for quick links to your products that you're selling or that you have badges for. They're not relying on these traditional 4-year degrees anymore. They want some of it, but they don't need all of it.
A bright future in Canada and for all of us. Dr. Andre de Freitas, founder of EdVisingU, thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, Ray.
So here's my take. Oh, Canada. Canada's approach to AI in education reflects its broader societal values, balancing innovation with thoughtful consideration of equity and access. The partnerships forming between Canadian universities, technology developers, and policymakers demonstrate a collaborative ecosystem that could become a model for responsible AI adoption globally. As institutions worldwide grapple with similar challenges, the Canadian experience offers valuable lessons about maintaining educational quality and cultural context while embracing technological advancement. The universities that will truly excel aren't just those implementing the most advanced technologies, but those creating the most thoughtful frameworks for their use.